4:06 a.m. Persian Gulf, 33 nautical miles northwest of Qatar. Iranian patrol boats just moved onto a direct intercept course with a U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer. 10 vessels, 2 coordinated elements, closing at 42 knots on converging bearings. The USS Mahan had 16 minutes before the lead element reached weapons engagement distance. U.S. Navy Command initiated a rapid maneuver immediately. Welcome to Navy Strikeforce. Today we're going inside the 147 minutes that followed that contact report. 147 minutes in which a 10-vessel Iranian patrol boat intercept attempt, a high-speed U.S. destroyer maneuver that used the geometry of the Persian Gulf itself as a defensive weapon, and a command decision chain that generated 3 separate escalatory response options before any of them were needed, produced one of the most tactically instructive confrontations between U.S. and Iranian naval forces in recent Gulf history. This is what a rapid naval maneuver actually means in the constrained, cluttered, politically sensitive waters of the Persian Gulf, and why the maneuver the Mahan executed at 4:06 a.m. was not simply about getting away from 10 Iranian boats. It was about repositioning in a way that changed the geometry of the threat faster than the Iranian formation could adapt to it. To understand the specific problem the Mahan was facing at 4:06 a.m., you need to understand the geography of the northwestern Persian Gulf in the sector where the contact was made. The northwestern Persian Gulf is not open ocean. It is a shallow, heavily trafficked body of water, with depths averaging 35 to 50 meters across most of its navigable area, punctuated by shoal patches that constrain the movement of deep draft vessels to defined corridors. Commercial tanker traffic from Kuwaiti and Iraqi terminals moves through this area continuously, day and night. The combination of shallow water, commercial traffic density, and the proximity of multiple nations' territorial boundaries creates a navigational environment where a U.S. Navy destroyer's freedom of maneuver is substantially more constrained than it would be in open ocean. Iranian tactical planners operating in this sector understand these constraints intimately. The shallow water shoal patches that force U.S. surface combatants onto specific navigational tracks are the same features that Iranian coastal forces have mapped, monitored, and incorporated into their intercept planning for decades. A ship that must stay in a defined corridor to avoid grounding is a ship whose future position can be projected with higher confidence than one operating in open water. And a ship whose future position can be projected is a ship that can be intercepted with precision timing rather than continuous pursuit. The 10 Iranian patrol boats that appeared on the Mahan's radar at 4:06 a.m. had not materialized randomly. They had been positioned in 2 holding clusters for 55 minutes before the simultaneous acceleration began. The first cluster, 6 boats, had been holding approximately 7 nautical miles northwest of the Mahan's patrol track. The second cluster, 4 boats, had been holding approximately 5 nautical miles northeast. Both positions placed them at the geometrically optimal bearing for a converging intercept once the Mahan entered the narrowing section of the navigational corridor ahead of her. During those 55 minutes, both groups had appeared on the Mahan's surface search radar as elevated but non-threatening patrol activity, the kind of IRGCN presence that is a daily feature of the Northern Gulf and does not by itself constitute a warning indicator. Isolated contacts holding position at moderate range are categorized as monitoring activity. They generate watch entries. They do not generate general quarters alerts. The simultaneous acceleration at 4:06 a.m., both groups executing the same speed increase at the same moment from positions that place them on converging intercept bearings, transformed the classification from monitoring activity to coordinated military approach in the time it took the watch officer to look at the radar display and understand what he was seeing. The watch officer had the contact reclassified and the commanding officer on the bridge within 75 seconds. By the time the commanding officer crossed from the bridge wing to the navigation display, the picture was clear. 10 vessels, 2 elements, closing on converging bearings, with the corridor geometry ahead of the Mahan progressively narrowing over the next 8 nautical miles. If she continued on her current course into the narrowing section, the Iranian intercept geometry would become increasingly favorable. The corridor would compress the Mahan's available lateral maneuver space, while both Iranian elements closed from opposing sides. The rapid maneuver decision was made at 4:07 a.m., 1 minute after reclassification. The commanding officer ordered a course reversal. Not a gradual course change, but a tight 180-degree turn executed at maximum rudder, bringing the Mahan around onto a southeastbound heading, while simultaneously ordering speed increased to 28 knots. The course reversal accomplished three things simultaneously. First, it moved the Mahan away from the narrowing section of the corridor ahead, the section where Iranian intercept geometry would have been most favorable, and back toward the wider, more maneuverable section she had already transited. A destroyer with room to maneuver is a fundamentally different tactical problem than a destroyer constrained to a narrow channel. Second, the reversal changed the Mahan's geometry relative to both Iranian elements in ways that were immediately disadvantageous to the approaching formation. The northwestern group of 6 boats had been on the Mahan's port bow before the reversal, the most favorable bearing for their intercept approach. After the reversal, the same group was on the Mahan's starboard quarter, a bearing that required a substantial course change by the Iranian vessels to maintain any intercept geometry at all. Third, the 28-knot speed increase opened range to both elements rapidly. At 28 knots heading away from a force closing at 42 knots from 7 nautical miles range, the relative closure rate dropped from 42 knots to 14 knots on the northwestern group's bearing, changing the time to engagement calculation from 10 minutes to over 30 minutes on the new geometry. The Iranian northeastern group, 4 boats, responded to the reversal with a course adjustment within 40 seconds. Rapid and precise. The 40-second response time suggested that the group had anticipated a course change response and had a contingency bearing pre-calculated for exactly this scenario. The Iranian northwestern group of 6 boats held its original course for 90 additional seconds before adjusting. The delay was operationally significant. For 90 seconds after the Mahan's reversal, the larger 6-boat element was pressing toward an area of ocean that the Mahan was no longer heading toward. The effective immediate threat had been reduced from 10 approaching vessels to 4 for a 90-second window. 90 seconds at 28 knots is 1.2 nautical miles of separation gained against the primary threat bearing before the northwestern group completed its adjustment. At 4:09 a.m., with the range to the northeastern group increasing and the northwestern group still completing its course adjustment, the commanding officer broadcast a warning on Channel 16 and the regional military coordination frequency. The transmission identified the Mahan as a U.S. Navy warship conducting innocent passage in international waters and characterized the approaching vessel's behavior as unsafe and inconsistent with established maritime regulations. No response from either Iranian element. Both groups continued their adjusted approach courses. At 4:11 a.m., 5 minutes after the reversal, the range to the leading northeastern group had opened from the pre-reversal 7 nautical miles to 9.4 nautical miles. The maneuver was working. The Mahan was increasing her separation advantage with every minute. But it had a geographic limit, and the commanding officer was tracking it on every chart update. The Mahan was heading southeast at 28 knots, back toward Qatar's maritime boundary. At her current speed and heading, the ship would reach the outer edge of Qatar's claimed maritime zone in approximately 22 minutes. Entering Qatari waters without prior notification and coordination was not an available option. It would constitute a violation of a key regional partner's maritime sovereignty, create a diplomatic incident that would politically outweigh any tactical benefit, and contradicted the explicit standing guidance from 5th Fleet for operations in this sector. 22 minutes of running room, then the boundary. If the Iranian groups maintained their adjusted approach at 42 knots, the range would stop opening at approximately the 12 nautical mile mark, as the Mahan's speed advantage ran out against the boundary constraint. 12 nautical miles was outside weapons engagement range for Iranian patrol boats, but close enough that the tactical situation would remain unresolved when the Mahan reached her geographic limit. At 4:12 a.m., 5th Fleet's response to the flash report arrived. 2 elements of guidance and an aviation positioning order. The aviation positioning: 2 MH-60R Seahawk helicopters from the USS Bunker Hill, operating 47 nautical miles south, were diverted to the Mahan's position. Estimated time of arrival: 19 minutes. Simultaneously, 2 FA-18E Super Hornets from the carrier air wing were being repositioned from their standard combat air patrol orbit to a holding orbit 60 nautical miles southwest. Not yet tasked to the contact area, but positioned to reduce their response time from 28 minutes to 14 minutes from the moment of a direct tasking order. The question from 5th Fleet: did the commanding officer assess that the current maneuver would resolve the situation within the geographic constraints, or was additional immediate action required? The commanding officer's assessment, transmitted at 4:14 a.m., was direct and unambiguous. The maneuver was working, but would reach its geographic limit before the Iranian approach was conclusively broken. The 19-minute helicopter ETA placed the helicopters on station approximately 3 minutes after the Mahan would need to reduce speed or alter course to avoid entering Qatari waters, leaving a 3-minute gap between the ship reaching her boundary and the arrival of aviation support that could change the Iranian formation's calculus. 3 minutes. In a confrontation where the Iranian groups were still closing, 3 minutes was not a comfortable gap to accept. 5th Fleet issued modified guidance at 4:16 a.m. The Mahan was authorized to reduce speed to 20 knots and execute a gradual course change to the east, holding her position at the maritime boundary without entering it while maintaining maximum available range from both Iranian elements. The guidance also moved the Super Hornets from holding orbit to direct tasking, not a strike order, but a direction to transit to the contact area for a show of presence mission. The Mahan reduced to 20 knots at 4:17 a.m. and began the gradual eastward course change. The maneuver geometrically stabilized her position relative to the maritime boundary, while maintaining the maximum possible range from both Iranian elements. At 4:17 a.m., 11 minutes into the engagement, the tactical picture was this. The Mahan was at the edge of her running room, at 20 knots on a stabilizing course, with the northeastern group at 10.2 nautical miles, and the northwestern group at 11.7 nautical miles. 2 Super Hornets were 11 minutes from station. 2 Seahawk helicopters were 19 minutes out. The northeastern group was at 36 knots, reduced from its initial 42, and still closing slowly. The northwestern group was at 34 knots and still closing, not breaking off, maintaining the approach at reduced speed, testing whether the boundary constraint would force the Mahan into an unfavorable position without the Iranian boats having to force a kinetic engagement. This is the Iranian tactical logic in its most refined form. Do not create an incident that justifies a U.S. military response. Create a pressure situation where American constraints, geographic, legal, political, do the forcing work, while Iranian forces simply maintain presence and wait. The commanding officer recognized the pattern. He made a decision at 4:18 a.m. that had not been in the original rapid maneuver plan. He requested 5th Fleet authorization to transmit a direct operational warning, not the routine Channel 16 maritime safety broadcast, but a direct military communication to the Iranian formation on the regional military coordination frequency that explicitly characterized the approach as a potential hostile act and invoked the Mahan's right of self-defense under U.S. standing rules of engagement and international law. The language difference matters. A maritime safety broadcast is a procedural formality. A direct military communication invoking self-defense rights is a statement of intent. It places on record that the commanding officer has assessed the approaching formation as a potential threat to his ship and crew, which is a legal precondition for escalated defensive action, and a political statement that changes the diplomatic framing of any subsequent events. 5th Fleet authorized the transmission at 4:19 a.m. The direct warning was broadcast at 4:20 a.m. in English and Farsi. The northeastern Iranian group began a speed reduction at 4:22 a.m., 36 knots dropping to 28. The northwestern group reduced speed at 4:24 a.m. Viper 1 and Viper 2, the Super Hornets, arrived on station at 4:28 a.m., descending to 2,000 feet and establishing an orbit pattern directly over the contact area. Their arrival was the third event in a sequence that the Iranian formation commanders had been watching accumulate. A course reversal that had opened the range, a direct self-defense warning on the military frequency, and now 2 armed fighter aircraft establishing a visible overhead presence. The northeastern group altered course northward at 4:31 a.m., breaking off. The northwestern group followed at 4:35 a.m. By 4:40 a.m., both elements were on opening courses. The Mahan resumed her northwestbound patrol at 4:52 a.m., 46 minutes behind her original schedule. The post-incident assessment was detailed and produced findings that went well beyond the immediate tactical events. The primary finding was about the intelligence preparation that had preceded the intercept. The Iranian formation had been positioned in its 2 holding clusters with a geometric precision that required specific prior knowledge, the exact width and depth contour of the navigational corridor at the intercept point, the location of Qatar's maritime boundary, and the Mahan's patrol track timing. None of those 3 data elements was available from a single source. Building the picture required correlation of hydrographic data, prior surveillance of the Mahan's patrol pattern, and knowledge of the maritime boundary coordinates. The assessment estimated a minimum of 3 hours of dedicated prior intelligence preparation to position the formation with the precision that had been observed. The 55-minute holding period before the intercept began was the final phase of an operation that had started hours earlier, when surveillance assets began correlating the data needed to design the approach geometry. A second finding addressed the northeastern group's 40-second course adjustment response to the Mahan's reversal. The speed of that adjustment, 40 seconds from the Mahan's turn to a calculated new intercept bearing, was assessed as consistent with a pre-calculated contingency response rather than a real-time reaction. Iranian patrol boat commanders do not calculate intercept geometry in 40 seconds while their vessels are accelerating at 42 knots in the dark. That calculation had been done before the approach began. The contingency bearing had been part of the mission brief. This finding meant that Iranian planners had anticipated the course reversal as a possible U.S. response and had prepared for it. The formation had entered the intercept attempt with a primary approach geometry and at least 1 contingency geometry already calculated. The commanding officer's rapid reversal, the decision that had been tactically correct and operationally effective, had been anticipated. The third finding was the one that generated the most discussion in the 5th Fleet Review. The 3-minute gap between the Mahan's geographic boundary and the Seahawk helicopter's ETA had existed because the helicopters had been on their standard 19-minute response posture aboard the Bunker Hill. If the Bunker Hill had been on an elevated alert posture, 10-minute response rather than 19-minute, the helicopters would have arrived before the Mahan reached her boundary. The reason the Bunker Hill was on standard rather than elevated posture was that the intelligence picture available before 4:06 a.m. had not indicated a specific elevated threat to vessels in this sector on this patrol cycle. The 55-minute holding period of the Iranian formation had been visible, but had not been assessed as an intercept preparation indicator before the simultaneous acceleration changed the classification. Elevated alert posture requires specific intelligence justification. The justification had not existed before the threat materialized. The operational changes that followed the incident addressed 2 of these 3 findings directly. The helicopter alert posture guidance for vessels operating in northern Gulf patrol sectors with known Iranian holding activity within 10 nautical miles was elevated to 12-minute response readiness. And the Iranian formation holding position geometry, specifically holding positions at bearings geometrically optimal for a corridor intercept, was added to the automated threat indicator library as a potential precursor indicator requiring assessment. Both changes were operationally sound, Both were implemented within 45 days of the incident. Neither addressed the third finding, that Iranian planners had anticipated and prepared contingency responses for U.S. maneuvers before the approach began. The preparation for contingencies is not observable from outside the planning process. It becomes visible only in the precision and speed of the response when the contingency is triggered. The Mahan had executed a rapid maneuver that worked. The course reversal, the speed increase, the geographic boundary management, the direct warning, the aviation tasking. It had all come together under time pressure into a coherent response that broke the Iranian approach without a weapon being fired. And somewhere in the Iranian operational planning system, that response was being documented, analyzed, and incorporated into the contingency planning for the next intercept attempt. Every successful defense teaches the adversary what a successful defense looks like. The Mahan's crew had performed with exceptional professionalism under pressure. The commanding officer had made the right call in the first minute with incomplete information. But the Iranian formation that had spent 3 hours preparing the geometry of a 16-minute approach had collected every data point they came for. And 3 hours of preparation is a short investment for the knowledge of exactly how a U.S. Navy destroyer responds when she runs out of room. Stay sharp, stay informed. This is Navy Strikeforce. We'll see you in the next one.